Hi, my name is Craig Brown. I'm interested in teaching art at the secondary level, so I've chosen today the 2021 French law against separatism, which is going to impact how I address political and religious content in my classes here at France. So the law was made in response to the beheading of the teacher Samuel Paty, who had shown an image of the Prophet Muhammad in one of his classes and then was killed by an Islamist extremist. And the goal of the law is to step up enforcement of political and ideological neutrality in schools. And so the law is actually directed towards educational institutions and teachers and not to the students, although it ends up affecting the student speech as well, as we'll see a little bit later. And the other interesting aspect of this is many of these regulations that the law is enforcing were already well enforced in the public school system. But now this is bringing this through inspections and enforcement into the private school system. In addition to maintaining neutrality, there are also requirements for the promotion of French Republican values by teachers in institutions. And so that obviously includes secularism, but it includes a bunch of other values as well. And it enforces those through mandatory reporting and inspection, and even criminalizes the act of undermining these values in class. So how the school and teachers would approach remaining neutral with regards to political content is through neutral framing. And the French law requires that any politically or religiously sensitive content must be used in a way that doesn't promote one viewpoint, presented under the protection that no student is being subject to ideological pressure, and embedded in a neutral civic educational context. So primarily that means that it can't be construed as advocacy, but it actually has a bunch of other dimensions that relate to those Republican values that are add a lot of complexity to how to present the work. So I'm not overly concerned about trying to navigate this with content that I am presenting or assignments that I am presenting in class. I feel like I have quite a bit of control over that. However, as an art teacher, I am not always the one who brings and frames content. Students are exploring subject matter, and I can't dictate subject matter in every assignment to students. Also, students are not subject to these same obligations. These laws primarily target the educational institutions in terms of their neutrality. They have rights and restrictions, and they are not obligated to maintain neutrality themselves, although that's a bit complicated. So, but in practical terms, the fact that in the context of class and in the context of school exhibitions, there cannot be any advocacy. Of course, they are then not able to go into these spaces and advocate. So the requirements of the law end up influencing my decisions about really three key areas that I can identify, which is what work can be created by a student as a graded assignment. So again, they have certain protections under the law. They can do politically motivated and even activist work, and that can be graded by me. It just becomes complicated when it goes to the next step, which is what work can be presented to the class for critique and how is that to be handled. If work that is then presented to the class for critique has to be framed. And so there actually has to be an authentic framing that is not, advocacy in order for me to bring it into critique, or at least I have to have the capacity to frame it, the discussion in a certain way. Which is actually quite complicated. And then the third, which is even a separate issue, is what work can be displayed publicly and how. It's actually pretty strict in terms of how work needs to be contextualized. And it's not that that would be that difficult to contextualize a certain piece of political artwork in an exhibition in a way which is not advocacy. The question really comes down to, on a best practices front, is that truly an authentic way to present every piece? Some pieces are just advocacy. That is what they are. Saying that they have other aspects to them, it doesn't deny their basic reality. So, what concepts, sorry, compliance and its overlap with best practices and how to work this all out is fascinating and frustrating. But for the most part, the two overlap. So teachers need to document their compliance as well. So that means lesson plans, class discussions, written statements for public displays. We're also responsible for documenting incidents of violations of neutrality. And then that needs to be reported to the school and then on to the parents. And then we need to be available for inspections. So what are some weaknesses of this law? The law is vague, especially the promoting Republican values, and it's up to inspectors to interpret. So that's complicated for me. I know how I would interpret these things and how I justify them, but it's difficult for me to know what the inspector is thinking. The second is that it was crafted in response to an Islamist extremist attack and has been used to close private Muslim schools. So the law has a perceived bias. People probably very rightfully feel targeted by this law, and so me complying with the law, I need to be very sensitive to that and make sure that I'm not causing harm in my compliance with the law. I have some references to the law itself, as well as to coverage of the law and to the Samuel Patty event, as well as some general discussion of dealing with sensitive topics in class.